is my really distinct pleasure to welcome Professor Ken Ledford to Siegal College tonight. On a couple of notes, one in a professional capacity. I'm a German historian by training, and this is Ken's field of study in terms of Central European history and his focus on Germany. So it's really a privilege and a pleasure for me to be able to hear Ken as well. And Ken is one of the first colleagues I met when I moved to Cleveland some 8 or 9 years ago, and is now a friendly face to see here over at Siegal. Tell you a little bit about our speaker. He is currently an associate professor of history and law at Case Western Reserve University down the road. He graduated with his BA from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and went on to complete a JD with honors at UNC. And I guess you discovered you liked teaching about law more than practicing law, so he went on to learn a bit more and completed his MA and PhD at Johns Hopkins University. Ken's published a book, From General Estate to Special Interest, German Lawyers, 1878 to 1933, and has another book coming out, let's hope in the very, very near future, Prussian Judges and the Rule of Law in Germany. He is widely published in terms of the articles that he has put in the field, and has received a number of grants, fellowships, and prizes on the international and national level, including a Fulbright, a senior research fellowship, which allowed him to study in Berlin, which makes some of us here quite jealous. At least me. So without further ado, the title of our talk for tonight is Midpoint of a Savage Century, September 1st, 1939, Professor Ledford. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for turning out tonight, and thank you, Brian. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to present this talk here at the Siegal College of Judaic Studies. Besides meeting Brian when he came to town, my connection with the Siegal College goes back to my arrival in 1991, the same year that my colleague Susanna Heschel arrived in the Department of Religious Studies at CWRU, where she was the founding director of the Rosenthal Center for Judaic Studies. But together we collaborated in creating a German Studies curriculum, which has obtained external funding and is now the Max Kade Center for German Studies. And I also soon discovered that the research interests of Alan Levinson, who was then here as well, overlapped closely with mine. And indeed, in conversation with Alan, I discovered that he was working on an article about a particular lawyer from the province of Hanover, whose personnel file I had found, but Alan hadn't. So that I was able to share this with him. This is one of the great joys of having a collaborative colleague around, around the same or analogous archives. I also benefit regularly from the Siegal College's fine library through the consortial catalog that we have. It's a single online catalog. At CWRU, they can't figure out how to get it from here to there. So I live over in Shaker Heights, about half a mile away, so I just come here. I do find it a great support for my research. And I'm really delighted tonight to have this chance to talk. When Brian contacted me and told me that he was seeking a speaker for an observance of the 70th anniversary of the outbreak of the Second World War in Europe, the German attack that began at Danzig and elsewhere in the early morning hours of September 1st, 1939. My first thought was to advise him to get a really internationally prominent scholar whose research would offer a definitive account and analysis of that terrible war. After all, I'm a social and legal historian of 19th and 20th century in Germany, and my own primary research doesn't directly address such momentous events as the Second World War. Indeed, the first scholar I thought of was my own undergraduate teacher, Gerhard Weinberg, emeritus professor of history at the University of North Carolina, whose magisterial 2-volume work, The Foreign Policy of Hitler's Germany, remains the definitive scholarly analysis on the subject, and whose equally monumental A World at Arms, A Global History of World War II, many of you probably know. On the other hand, all historians of German history, regardless of their time period and subject matter specialties, must not only grapple with September 1st, 1939, and the murderous consequences of that aggression in their teaching. Beyond that, it stands as a truism that for German historians, the Third Reich and its ideology, including its embrace of aggressive war, its deadly contempt for so-called inferior races, these questions lie behind the way that all historians of Germany, whatever the era or topic of their focus, frame their research questions. So with apologies to the absent Gerhard Weinberg, and the confession that much of what you're going to hear tonight will rely profoundly on his work, I offer these thoughts on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the outbreak of the Second World War in Europe. Now to begin with, September 1st, 1939, as a choice of the time to commemorate this anniversary, is a distinctively Eurocentric choice. Certainly, on the morning of September 1st, 1939, millions of Chinese awoke to wonder what the fuss was, having been subject to aggression from Japan in Manchuria since 1931, and full-fledged invasion of the Chinese heartland since 1937. Europeans and Americans include this so-called Second Sino-Japanese War, 1931 to 45, as part of the Second World War, but dating only from the Japanese attacks on Hong Kong, Malaya, including Singapore, the Philippines, and Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 8th, 1941. They happened actually at the same time, but the international dateline was in the middle. So at the same time, it was December 7th some places and December 8th others. Of course, from the Americans' perspective, again referenced this past Sunday in The Plain Dealer by Dick Fegler, the Second World War began only with the Pearl Harbor attack, meaning, in his account on Sunday, that the sacrifice sought from the American public lasted much less time than the suffering of Europeans or Chinese. And of course, even today, even tonight, this talk competes with a presidential address on a pending health insurance reform. Earlier today, the conferral of the 2009 Inamori Ethics Prize on Mary Robinson at CWRU. And of course, the newspapers quickly will shift to the 8th anniversary of the attacks of September 11th. It's hard sometimes to take notice. But Europeans take notice. Last week, on September 1st, in the middle of a heated election campaign that culminates on the 27th of this month, German Chancellor Angela Merkel spoke at a memorial observation in Danzig itself. Speaking on a program together with Polish President Lech Kaczynski and Prime Minister Donald Tusk, together with 18 other heads of government, she said, "I prostrate myself before the victims of the German assault on Poland, which started a war unleashed by Germany, which brought immeasurable agony to many nations, years of deprivation of rights, degradation, and destruction." 20 years ago, in 1989, I found myself in Berlin on September 1st, the 50th anniversary of the attack, the last decennial anniversary when large numbers of people survived who had experienced the event as adults. And even when, in the midst of momentous tumult in the then still divided Germany, with East Germans swarming from Czechoslovakia into Hungary and on through the hole ripped in the Iron Curtain into Austria, thence to West Germany, where they were greeted with their 100 Deutsche Marks of Begrüßungsgeld. The dominant theme in the public mind in Berlin was to memorialize the outbreak of the war that led to the deaths of 60 million people in Europe alone. So in accord with my assignment from Brian, and in accord with the observances last week in Gdansk, I want to mark this occasion tonight by addressing briefly 4 themes.